209. Property, Charity and Freedom. Chalcedon Position Paper number 117, January 1990. An old country customary law which greatly impressed me as a child had to do with recipes. Every area and sometimes even towns had their own recipes. One might be very partial to a savoury dish made by a neighbour from another area, but the recipe was never asked for, nor used if known. Each community respected the property rights of all other communities to their recipes. Property rights did not depend upon the state. They belonged to families and communities. One of the major revolutions of all history came with a new view of property which first became vocal with the Enlightenment and John Locke. Locke's social compact theory made the state the protector and guarantor of all property. Locke's theory witnessed to an important change in the doctrine of property. Previously, family and clan law, the personal grant of a lord or king, or some like origin, established property ownership. Now it became the state. For Locke, all lawful government arises from the consent of the people. This theory was in itself a revolution because it had previously been held that lawful government meant a conformity to God's law and justice. The premise for the Christian position was the belief that the earth is the Lord's, and the fullness thereof, the world, and they that dwell therein. Psalm 24, verse 1. Now the state rested on the will of the people, and the state validated property. Locke saw the state as the protector of property, but once the state became the source of authority, it had the power to shift the ownership of property to the state. John Locke, the champion of property, became a spiritual ancestor to Karl Marx. Locke's view depersonalized property. It culminated a trend to reduce ownership to a state-issued title rather than a family power over the generations. The depersonalization of property was also the depersonalization of man. Property became real estate, a kind of medium of exchange and investment. Labour became an independent entity, an abstraction of man into his function. The banker appraises all things in terms of money, and the banker increasingly became the ruler of the new order. While industrialization was basic to the growth of capitalism, it was itself increasingly dependent on the banker. With the rise of limited liability laws, there was a shift of power from industry to banking. This new order was able to retain power and vitality wherever Christian premises still governed the relations of men rather than abstractions like capital and labour. There were still evidences of this in the Depression, which began in 1929. For example, in Massachusetts, one factory owner told all his workers that he would keep them working and pay them as he was able. All the men agreed, and all were in due time paid in full. The plant survived, and so did all the workers. This was, however, quote, illegal, end quote, and the owner later served time in a federal prison. Another example. A major eastern railroad with a bad record in recent years kept many of its men off welfare during the Depression by placing all in a pool to work part-time and share in whatever work and pay was available. Other like cases occurred. In the last century, such practices were more common. No scholar now concerns himself with them. People are viewed abstractly, in terms of profit and loss, not in terms of fellow Christians or fellow men with very personal needs. At one time, men met with their workers, ate with them, and went to church with them. There was a loyalty impossible in a depersonalized relationship. A Christian employer sees himself as having duties to all those who work for him. An employer whose views have only an economic determination cannot treat them as men. I have seen mansions once owned by wealthy capitalists built within a block or two of their factory. They were close to their work and workers in more ways than one. When man is reduced to economic man, to an abstraction, he will in time be dissatisfied, no matter how well paid. We are all of us more than a function, and to reduce a man to his function, for us, is to dehumanize and degrade him. And no high wages can do more than briefly palliate that fact. To dehumanize capital and labor means to deny that any personal and Christian relationship is necessary between employer and worker. The connection is then reduced to an economic one. It becomes simply a matter of money. Society, however, cannot exist without care one for another, and if persons refuse to care, then caring is assumed by the state. The result is welfarism, impersonalism, and destructive care. Caring charity has passed from the individual, from the church, family and businessman to the state, and it is proving to be socially suicidal. It is also destructive of freedom and property. The taxes required for statist charity support the bureaucracy better than the poor. The property owner is no longer the source of charity. The state is in the main. The property owner is less and less in control of his property, and he pays a ransom for it in taxes. Having surrendered his godly responsibilities, he is no longer a free man. One authority has described property as a bundle of powers. The state now controls that bundle of powers by taxation and regulation, and the state has become the central power in society. Many rebel against the state by means of the tax revolt. This is to treat the symptom, not the cause. The people have first rebelled against God and His law. They treat one another as abstractions. They refuse to acknowledge their responsibilities to their fellow men. They are believers in economic man, and hence reduce man to an abstraction, and the religious and moral apostasy of our time to a question of taxes. They trust not in regeneration, but in protests and revolution. We need to see ourselves as God's property. We are not our own. We are the Lord's. Our freedom does not come out of an independence from taxes or anything else, but from our regeneration in Christ, our freedom from sin, and our freedom to care one for another. John Locke's world is dying all around us. We are not machines nor economic ciphers, nor are we abstractions. We are God's creation, and we must so regard one another. When God said, "Thou shalt not steal," He did not have in mind Washington, D.C.'s laws, but His own. When He commanded us to be mindful of the needs of others, He did not have federal or state welfare in mind. His doctrines of law and property are not those of the state. Remember, except the Lord build the house, they labor in vain that build it. Psalm 127, verse 1.